All right. Anyway, let's see how Arakaali goes. That's how Arakaali goes. Oh my god, bow leveling so good now. What the hell? I also think these Crucible things are pretty good too. Look at the 1.9 attack. Grove bow is a pretty good base. She actually healed. I killed her too quickly. The game's like, no. The game says no. Fine, I'll do it again. So rude. How dare you heal? You all saw her. She had 1 hit point. Trying to cheat. So rude. G'day folks, Ziggity here. Never thought I'd be saying these words, but bow leveling is really great right now. I've always loved my bow builds, but leveling has always been a bit rough. Attack builds are always a bit more gear reliant, and that can be rough at League launch. And bow builds always had to get extra projectiles to make skills like Lightning Arrow or Tornado Shot actually functional, and that puts a lot of pressure on your DPS. Single target often feels non-existent as a result. Leveling with things like Toxic Rain and Caustic Arrow or Rain of Arrows is certainly better, and people do race with some of those setups as well. But things have changed quite a lot for the average player now to that will make bow leveling much more of a treat. The existing Ballista options added a while ago really round out your damage for single target and give you a lot more flexibility. The new sources of extra projectiles on the passive tree make leveling with skills like Lightning Arrow and Ice Shot actually a treat. Rain of Arrows is still a great choice, but you can actually use the skill you want now to level and that be a reasonable choice. The shuffling of Sniper's Mark to Act 1 means that you can start using that far sooner as well, which is really nice. And Manaforged Arrows, the new support gem, is truly excellent for boosting damage. Overall, leveling my current Lightning Arrow Raider has been one of my all-time strongest League starts. Very surprising for a bow build like this, and while Crucible nodes certainly have helped, I didn't find any really busted leveling uniques or items, and I didn't buy any gear to level, just random rares from the ground. So I wanted to make this video to share just some joy that we may have actually finally got the fabled bow league after a few debates, and that bows are finally starting to feel like they're in a good place for leveling overall. That said, I will mention that you do need to know and use the tools available to you. It's not like some spell setups where you can just have like one skill and just kind of right click your way through the content. You do need to use kind of all of the gem slots available to you to make the most of it. Now do keep in mind, to begin with, right at the very beginning, you do want to use Galvanic Arrow, Shrapnel Ballista straight away, and then transition into Rain of Arrows when that becomes available early on. Around the time that I picked up Master Fletcher, after coming out of the Ranger area for the bow attacks fire an additional arrow, was when I got myself a Vaal Lightning Arrow for like 1 chaos off trade, and then I switched over to Lightning Arrow just to kind of see how it went compared to Rain of Arrows. Now I didn't actually expect that much, because Rain of Arrows is generally a far better leveling skill for bows. It doesn't require the extra projectiles, it hits in a pretty large area, and it does pretty good damage. It's considered the skill that most like Tornado Shot builds will use until they get into maps, and then some quite often. But I swapped over to Vaal Lightning Arrow with Master Fletcher and some of the other tools available to us here, and it actually felt very competitive with Rain of Arrows, and that Vaal Lightning Arrow I think even tipped it over the edge for me. Once Artillery Ballista becomes available to you, you want to swap over to that from Shrapnel Ballista as well. It's generally speaking a lot better. It's a solid single target, and it even has a pretty decent amount of AoE, especially benefiting from your extra projectiles as well. You can, instead of Artillery Ballista, use a Ballista support gem and use Storm Rain. However, I find the visuals of that to be pretty intolerable, but it is quite effective, especially with those extra projectiles. But I mean, you can use actually just Artillery Ballista for clearing. It's quite good for that, as you can see, and it is an insane booster for single target as well. A quick note on Vaal Lightning Arrow, if you're going to be using that. I haven't personally tested Ice Shot yet, but I know that people have been enjoying that. Vaal Lightning Arrow is fantastic. It gets 2 charges. It denies an area for you, so it can kill a nasty pack of monsters in an area or any of the sort of circle league mechanics. You can use slower projectiles to keep it in a smaller area if you want, but it works pretty great either way. And an important thing to note is that the way that it actually works is that where you aim your mouse cursor is the center point of the Vaal Lightning Arrows, and you'll barrage all of the arrows in a line to that point first. That means that you can shoot through a target and hit them with every single arrow like a very bursty barrage setup. Now that is excellent for killing rares and bosses, and in itself will often wipe things out before the rest of the Vaal Lightning Arrow even happens. Like that. You just aim behind them and shoot through them. that'll create the center point. You can try and do it just behind them if you want, but that barrage of arrows will all hit the same target, which is fantastic. Now, if you weren't fully aware of it, one of the big changes this league is that Master Fletcher now gives you an additional arrow, and multi-shot just up here, which is not too far away, also effectively gives you an additional arrow, attacks, fire, an additional projectile. That also works on non-bow setups, but bows get access to both of them, which is fantastic. Now, these two combined mean that you can kind of get away with using Lightning Arrow without LMP or GMP. However, testing a bunch of different setups, I found both GMP still felt really good, and I actually felt that lesser multiple projectiles felt really good as well. The AoE clear with lesser multiple projectiles is, 5 arrows? And that feels really good with the chaining effects of Lightning Arrow, and I imagine it feels pretty good with the AoE overlapping of Ice Shot as well. I haven't tried Tornado Shot. That tends to want a lot more projectile speed, but I'm sure that is passable. Probably getting a lot better once you do get some of that projectile speed. So you can kind of play around with the different support gems, see whether you enjoy the extra projectiles of greater multiple projectiles. When enemies are against a wall or when the pack is particularly big, that does come out on top. But less multiple projectiles costs a bit less mana, and it has a bit less of a damage penalty, so overall your single target will feel a lot better. The really strange thing about this whole setup is that normally you wouldn't ever want to use less multiple projectiles skill for killing bosses, but I feel like I do enough damage with this linked in there that I've just been using this skill on single targets without worrying about gem swapping. You know, I haven't swapped over to, say, faster attacks or barrage or anything like that for single target. I've just been using this combined with Vaal Lightning Arrow combined with Artillery Ballista has been getting the job done for every boss through the leveling experience without having to do any gem swapping. So that gives you an idea of the current state of things. Now, I'm Ele Bow Leveling, so some of my advice will be tailored towards that. Fizz or Fizz conversion might be a little bit different, but not that different overall, and the leveling experience is often the same in terms of gearing, where added flat damage is still a very good idea no matter what. That said, let's talk about gearing in general. So for an Ele setup, you're typically looking for fast bow bases, your thicket and your grove bows, but anything like 1.4 attacks per second-ish is pretty good. And then you're looking for just nice added damage, added cold, added lightning, added fire. If you get a big fizz damage bow with attack speed, that can work okay as well. Just damage is king while leveling a bow setup. Slots you can get damage on include the bow, obviously. A quiver is a very good place for damage, and attack speed makes a big difference here. This quiver in particular I found pretty early on, and just while leveling, and it was a huge damage boost. 22,000 from 18,900 now. When I was using like a fast base attack speed grove bow, I had like 1.9 attacks per second. I think it was even better because of the scaling. Gloves are also a good spot to get attack speed and damage, so you can get flat damage there as well. And you can get flat damage on jewelry as well, so things like rings, for example. Otherwise, as usual, just stay on top of your life and resistances and you'll be fine. Defensively, this felt quite good because evasion is actually a very strong defensive mechanic for leveling. As long as you have your resistance sorted and a bit of life on your gear here and there, evasion will keep you alive through the vast majority of things. Not necessarily enough by itself in hardcore, but in softcore to get through most content with only the occasional death, easy peasy. Current bow meta very much seems to be in favor of Ballista as your second setup. For a very good reason. You can put the Ballistas down, they keep firing while you're using your other skill to also keep firing. So they act as a damage add, a good single target in their own right, and they can supplement your AoE as well. And Artillery Ballista is pretty well rounded for that. As such, the Watchtowers node is highly recommended, +1 maximum summon Ballista totems. You can also get some extra survivability from that by getting 5% of damage taken from hits from your nearest totem's life before you. So that's just 5% hard mitigation whenever there's totems nearby. A new thing this league is hits have 25% chance to treat enemy monster resistance values as inverted. While leveling, you don't tend to have any resistance lowering effects, and even after you do, this mastery is still very good. I highly suspect this will get nerfed at some point, but any bosses have positive resistances, and any monsters that happen to roll with resistance boosting effects will effectively take a lot of extra damage. You flip that. So if a boss has effectively 40% resistance, that will 25% of the time become 40% minus resistance, so they'll take a lot of extra damage. Turn their own strength against them. Insanely good mastery, definitely recommended to get as early as possible. Do keep in mind now that bow leveling setups also have access to both point blank for more damage up close and precise technique. Point blank is potentially debatable with projectile shooty oriented setups like Lightning Arrow and things like that. But that said, you know, you can put your totems near them and you can stand near them to drop your Vaal Lightning Arrows, and overall I think point blank is worth it. Precise technique, however, is fantastic to level and highly recommended. The only thing you need to do for this is to keep your accuracy above your life. Actually takes a little bit of work, not as easy as you might think, but Precision Aura, these accuracy attack speed nodes here are great, and the Bow Mastery, 100 accuracy per green socket on equipped bow, will not only get your accuracy to 100% easily, but also will help you keep your accuracy above your life. Let's see if my current one is 2,862. No, I need to correct that. Time for me to get a little bit more accuracy. I'll pick up one of the accuracy masteries to put me back over the edge. Just keep it, this tricked me a few times where this keystone wasn't working, so do make sure you check it every so often just to make sure that your accuracy is keeping up with your life, especially as you upgrade your gear. The final accuracy mastery, the 500 flat accuracy rating, is fantastic while leveling. It's actually even good at endgame, because the worst it gets down is to like 300 accuracy, so that's still quite good. But, you know, it's a lot more than that even while leveling, so that's a good way to boost that accuracy by a huge margin. And with the scaling from this, it'll actually end up being a huge amount of accuracy. For mana, you're always using a mana flask while leveling, at least initially, but do keep in mind you have the mana leech with mana gain on hit minor passive here. This minor passive is actually the key more so than anything. I usually get that and I don't get the leech node here, so just those 2 points. But you actually have another option now, which is very good, but does have a drawback I'll explain in a second in this current league. So in here is a mana leech node, and sometimes that's enough, but sometimes if you have a very small mana pool unavailable, unreserved, that can be not quite fast enough to keep up with your mana expenditure. The new mastery Leech is instant, applies to both your life and mana leech, so it effectively converts some of your mana leech into mana gain on hit, which makes that instant. And with skills that hit a lot like Lightning Arrow, that'll fill up your mana very quickly. Watch my unreserved mana pool down there. You can see how it basically instantly jumps up, where usually Leech looks like more of a smooth movement. That's because of that instant Leech there. So that's a really fantastic setup. Now, the drawback I mentioned for that is that some mechanics, like the current Crucible monsters, seem to have a lot of damage mitigation, and that makes you leech very little at all, almost nothing. When you fully charge a Crucible and the monsters have like 90% damage mitigation, you don't technically do that much damage to actually leech off of, and as such, that causes problems with life and mana leech. This is a problem for any build that leeches, unfortunately. So in that case, hard mana on hit is better, so you can get that from somewhere. Otherwise, long term, of course, you can get things like minus mana cost, but I just thought that I'd mention that because this is a very good setup for like 99% of content. And if you are having trouble with Crucible monsters while leveling, you can always whack down your artillery ballistas, and they will continue to shoot even if you are out of mana. So let's talk about your total package of things, because that's the one kind of downside of these bow setups is you do need to know the tools that are available to you and use them. And that does mean that you really need to stay on top of your sockets. You will be filling out your sockets a lot on bow builds compared to some spellcaster setups, for example. But that's kind of just Path of Exile in general these days, isn't it? So you want to try and get initially a 3-link Ballista setup and then transition that over to a 4-link Ballista setup. So I'm using Artillery Ballista with elemental damage, added cold and faster attacks. Some people like to use Focus Ballista, but I prefer that the Ballistas keep firing when I'm not, because that's, I feel like, their main advantage. And then you want a 3-link for your main skill early on, again, Galvanic Arrow or Rain of Arrows, and then transitioning into your other skill after that. With those extra projectiles, you have a lot more flexibility in what you're going to do, but generally you'll have something like less than multiple projectiles or greater, and then an added cold, things like Trinity and elemental damage with attack supports work quite well as well. Trinity is actually way easier to balance than people think it is. On an Ele setup like this, you know, lightning has a high variance, so 400 to 4000 lightning damage versus 1600 to 2800 cold damage. That is enough variance that with all of the hits that you're putting out, that your Trinity will basically always be online. It takes one shot up against basically anything to fill up your Trinity resonance, so it's super, super easy to keep online in builds like this. For leveling, Herald of Ice is fantastic as always. I later have swapped over to like Anger and Grace and things like that, and you can use Precision as necessary. Right now I'm not even using Precision, I don't particularly need it, although it would get that keystone back online for me, but I'll just spend the extra passive and do that anyway. Don't forget that Sniper's Mark, available in Act 1 now, is fantastic. Huge amount of increased damage taken, and also projectiles split to additional targets. Now, when you get Mark on Hit a little bit later, that will mean that you'll be automatically applying that, which boosts your clear speed as well as your single target. So fantastic stuff right there. You can also get the Culling Strike against marked enemies as well to help with bossing and make things even faster. Not really necessary, but an extra option. Dash and Blink Arrow give you a very nice movement package, though some people prefer Flame Dash or Frost Blink. It's up to you. I am burying the lead, of course, though, because the real new star of this league is this new Manaforged Arrow support. The way this works is that when you spend 300% of the mana cost of the linked skills, it will automatically fire them. So you attack with bow skills. So I attack with my lightning arrow, and it basically takes me like 2 or 3 attacks, and then you'll see the extra arrows firing off. And that is currently Frenzy and Ensnaring Arrow. Now I'll note on the former in a second, but firstly, the Frenzy is the main one to note here. Manaforged Arrow's Frenzy, the 2-link, gives you full frenzy charges always. There's no excuse to not have frenzy charges. You don't have to use Blood Rage. It works on bosses. It works on while you're clearing. It gives you all of your frenzy charges perpetually. Basically, you just roll around shooting. You don't have to think about it whatsoever, and you will automatically trigger frenzy. Your extra projectiles make it very easy for it to hit monsters, and as you can see, whenever that happens, you gain a frenzy charge. And that happens very frequently. Even when you're just placing ballistas, that'll happen. So even if you're not shooting, you'll still fire off frenzies randomly and keep up the frenzy charges. That's insanely strong. You can also link Culling Strike to that and Power Charge on crit later to generate power charges. The other piece of tech which I used while leveling, but is not currently working for me, is Ensnaring Arrow. So Ensnaring Arrow increases projectile damage taken from monsters that are ensnared by 19, well, you know, an amount that is very significant damage boost. The only problem with Ensnaring Arrow is it doesn't actually apply the ensnare if you pierce or chain off of the monster. So if you at some point pick up pierce or get like piercing chance on a helmet or a quiver or something like that, your Ensnaring Arrow will stop working. So at that point, it's not worth using anymore, just because you, unfortunately, I kind of hate that about a Ensnaring Arrow, but if you don't yet have any piercing or chaining or anything like that, and certainly Lightning Arrow is strong enough without it while leveling, Ensnaring Arrow will boost your damage a lot. And that'll just be applying automatically as well. So I'm firing off those frenzies and those Ensnaring Arrows. Now, some people are also using Manaforged as a second damage setup. So putting it in a 4-link with a damage dealing skill, maybe just their primary skill again, or something like Rain of Arrows, and then putting some damage supports on it. You could, if you hate using Ballistas, personally, I love them. They're really fast to place and they do very good damage and clear. But if you really don't like using Ballistas, you could put a Manaforged setup in your second 6-link long term, and put a bunch of damage supports on that and a few different skills in there. So that is a potential other easy peasy option for, you know, boosting your clear and damage overall. So lots of cool stuff. Just such a fun package of things right now. Bow leveling has just never felt so good. Anyway, folks, I think that just about covers it for my experiences so far with bow leveling, and I hope I've shared a couple helpful tips that will make your experience better. Let me know how it goes. I'm Ziggy D, and thanks very much for watching.